so good. Yeah. It's gonna be good.
Okay, my mic.
Oh yeah, that helps.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Milan Smar. I'm an event facilitator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory and that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're gathered here tonight to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of The Haunting of Adrian Yates by Markus Harwood-Jones, welcoming Markus back to his hometown to celebrate his first full-length YA novel. Many thanks to Metonymy Press for helping to make this evening a possibility. This evening will feature a reading followed by an interview with host Samantha Beiko. There will then be an opportunity to ask questions. If you are here in person, please raise your hand. I will approach you with a microphone so that the people watching at home can hear you. And if you are watching from the live stream, please type your questions into the chat and I will do my best to pass those along. And I'll be back at the close of the event to review the signing procedure, but I'll just mention to you that when we'll transport Markus over to the signing table, we ask you to remain seated for a few moments while Markus gets settled over there. Now, Markus Harwood-Jones is proudly queer and trans author, artist, and academic who has been writing since he can remember. Markus specializes in writing young adult fiction and has a soft spot for corny love stories, as do I. He lives in downtown Toronto where he writes, contributes to the career and creative communities, is undertaking a PhD at Queen's University, is a new dad, and he's also a TikToker with over 100,000 followers. You know, no big deal. The Haunting of Adrian Yates deals with the age-old question. What do you do when your best friend and your boyfriend don't get along? Oh, but there's a small add-on, and that is that the boyfriend is a ghost. Our host for this evening will be Samantha Beiko, a Winnipeg-based fantasy author and award-winning graphic novelist. Her works include The Lake and the Library, the award-winning Realms of Ancient Trilogy, the Brindlewatch Quintet, and the webcomic Krampus is My Boyfriend. Beiko won the 2020 Best Graphic Novel Aurora Award for Krampus and was nominated for the 2020 Joe Shuster Award. She's also the editor of the comic anthology Gothic Tales of Haunted Love and Gothic Tales of Haunted Futures. Now, here to read a selection, please join me in welcoming Markus Harwood-Jones.
Wow, what an intro, and thank you so much to everybody who's come out tonight. It's just such a joy to see all of you, and friends and family and new friends, people on the live stream. There's 2 cameras, I think, going, and my TikTok, which is running live right now and will continue to do so until I go and turn it off, as things go. Tonight, I will be reading from The Haunting of Adrian Yates, but first I just have a couple words. Thank you to McNally for presenting that land acknowledgement. I also just wanted to mention that this book was written in Toronto, which is also Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. And specifically, whenever we do land acknowledgements, I think a lot about the work of Chelsea Vowell, who is an author and activist, who says land acknowledgements, while important, really only have meaning when they're met with action. So with that in mind, I'd just like to bring everyone awareness to the fact that the Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction Network is fundraising right now for its Winter Survival Fund. And if you feel so inclined, they are always welcoming donations. And that would mean a lot to me as somebody who wrote a story set in Toronto, all about what it's like to struggle through poverty and gentrification. So getting into that, I also just wanted to share that I'll be reading from the prologue tonight. Some of the themes that are going to be coming up, some of them will be a bit heavy. There's going to be mentioning of things like self-harm, suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression. If you need a minute, no judgment, take your time to step out, step back as you need. I also have set up a little activity for everyone because I'm a facilitator at heart and I come by it honestly. If those who know my family, I have brought a whole bunch of ghost-shaped Post-it notes. They will be at a table beside my signing table, and you are invited to write down what is haunting you or what has you possessed, and put your note into the jar presented. If you don't want to share it, you can put your note in your pocket and walk away. But at the end of my tour, this is my last stop, I am gathering all of the ghosted notes, putting them in my backyard fire pit and setting them ablaze. So if there's something you need to let go of, may now be the time. All right, so with that in mind, I just wanted to give one more thank you to the generous host McNally, Milen, thank you for being here. For Samantha, for the conversation we will have, a future thank you. For Metonymy Press for taking a chance on my queer little ghost story. And I also wanted to say thank you to my family and especially my grandparents for being here tonight. All right, so the prologue is a few pages long. If you want to read along, it's right at the beginning, as most prologues are. The whole thing will take probably about 10 minutes at most. And then there will be an opportunity for a question and answer period following my discussion with Sam. Before Adrian Yates knew his own name, he knew the graveyard. The subtle bend of its grass, left to run long and yellow in the summertime. The gaunt, twisted trunk of its solitary oak tree, arms forever tangled in the iron fence. Uneven rows of slick, mossy stones, his favorites were the ones without names. Some had their letters worn by alternating seasons, ice storms, and acid rain. Others buried here were simply too poor to afford a stonemason's hand, remembered instead as mother, son, or beloved. Then there were those like Adrian. Those whose heartfelt names might never have made it to their own lips, much less to another's ears. Those who hid in closets and knocked twice bars and homes tucked under pillowcases. Laid to rest by unsuspecting spouses and children, they remained unknown to anyone, even themselves. With a rough scrubber and kitchen scissors for the weeds, Adrian would walk along the narrow lines of dirt. He never quite knew what he was looking for until he found it. An obscure date, perhaps? A patch of dandelions reaching towards the sun. A tug in his chest would tell him who needed attention. Adrian would then sink into the mud and begin his work. He wiped away their loneliness one stone at a time. While sprucing up their cracks or trimming back the weeds, Adrian told them stories, secrets, gossip. He spoke about the drudgery of high school, his unengaging teachers, the petty conflicts of his classmates. He'd share snippets of his parents' arguments at home or speculate on the staying power of his best friend's latest hobby. When the weather turned and the ground hardened, he came with library books and read his favorite passages aloud while sipping hot tea from a thermos. The Graves listened well and shared their lessons too. On the best days, they would remind him, it's not so bad to go without a name. Sometimes it makes you more interesting. In time, Adrian did learn his name. It inched out along the margins of his notebooks in the fog on the bathroom mirror. He held it tight, cultivating a secret sense of familiarity. He carried it throughout the day, tucked in his back pocket. When at home, in the privacy of his own room, he'd slip it out of hiding and pick off any stray bits of lint before taking it to bed. It became his friend, his confidant. Yet his name grew restless. Unsatisfied with living in obscurity, it began to writhe and pulse and plot its escape. On an autumn evening, when sunset shadows ran long across city streets, Adrian's fathers were marathoning a sitcom with some old person thing, canceled ages back and then reposted online by a niche yet determined fan base. Dad sat with a bowl of popcorn balanced on his lap, picking out crispy bits that had burnt in the microwave. In turn, Pop snapped on the charred cast-offs while offering well-worn critiques of continuity errors and romantic cliches. It was a practice dance, and they ran through its steps without haste or fatigue. Adrian was their singular audience. He occasionally added to the banter while prepping food in what passed for a kitchen in their pocket-sized apartment. As Adrian peeled back the cardboard cover of a microwave meal, he held his name under his tongue. Its presence added a pleasant zest to an otherwise dreary dinner. Pop paused his commentary to pick a popcorn kernel from the back of his guns. When Adrian opened his mouth to fill the gap in conversation, his name jumped at its chance. It scurried along his soft palate, dodged clenching teeth, and leapt like a bird too young to fly. Adrian tried to catch it, but too late. The remnants of his secret ran between his fingers like egg yolk and landed with a squelch. In the silence that followed, Adrian tested his ability to rewind time. He watched his fathers carefully, uncertain if they'd noticed the gooey mess now splattered across the kitchen floor. Dad gave a short thumbs up, saying, "Sure thing, kiddo." Pop grunted and dug around for the remote. The microwave chimed, announcing prepackaged food had gone from frozen to burnt. Adrian rushed back to his room, but his appetite failed to follow. Entombed beneath a pile of blankets, he could still hear the television's laugh track. Despite its lackluster welcome, Adrian's name became a repeat houseguest. Dad made space around the coffee table, letting it nibble on the crumbs of their daily small talk. Pop would invoke it when reminding Adrian to wash the dishes or take out the trash. The first few times, Adrian winced, not because his name felt wrong, rather it was too right, too real. Even when whispered, his name felt like a shout. The slightest hiccup was a passing glance on exposed skin. Every pause held with it the weight of the world's judgment. His father's efforts were just that, effort. Their awkward adjustments weighed on Adrian's narrow shoulders. Staring at the stucco ceiling night after night, he listened intently to their muffled chatter. He was waiting for a slip-up, a complaint. When none came, Adrian became all the more wary. No doubt they were stewing in unspoken resentment. What other explanation was there? It wasn't until his 16th birthday that Adrian learned the truth. His name appeared again, this time in Dad's slanted handwriting, scribbled on a dollar store card that Pop probably picked up on his way home from work. It was the mundanity of it all, the way it sat so quietly alongside a plate of only slightly burnt homemade brownies. His fathers hardly seemed to even notice its presence as they fiddled with a pack of matches, taking turns at failing to light the birthday candles. That's when Adrian saw his name for what it had always been, like the mold between the shower tiles or the pigeons nesting on anti-roosting spikes across the street. It was just a fact of life. Persistent, if nothing else, it had moved in, unpacked its suitcases, and made itself known as a member of the family. Zoomer was absolutely thrilled when she found out. They had been walking home together after school, her laughter trailing behind them like mist. Adrian smiled along, his name writing in the folds of his oversized hoodie. It hissed and whined, desperate to see the light of day. He gripped it in his fists, muffling the protest, but Zoomer must have heard it anyway. She asked him outright, while kicking at a frozen puddle. Caught by surprise, Adrian couldn't think of a lie fast enough and accidentally told the truth. Yes, he'd been carrying a new name. Well then, said Zoomer, let it out already. Not here. Where the cars drove too fast and neighbor kids raced their bikes down the broken sidewalk, where old men permanently sat on the rusty patios of daytime bars, smoking pack after pack, even on the coldest winter days. No, if he was going to share his name, it had to be somewhere else, someplace private. So Adrian led Zoomer to the graveyard. A small plot, it had no good reason to be so quiet. The fence posts were wide set and rusty, an ineffective barricade to the local noise and traffic. Yet when they stepped through the gate, the city's clamor bent to the rustling of unraked leaves, the crunch of fallen twigs. The sprawling vines of forgotten planters had already gone to bed for the season, their stems withered and brown. Staunchly rooted alongside the rows of graves were a couple of maple trees, several cottonwoods, and a lonely old oak. The stones themselves kept their secret, silently welcoming Adrian's return. As with so many things in life, the graveyard needed no reason to be what it was. It simply knew no other way to be. The cemetery trees rattled, branches bare. Adrian huddled with Zoomer below the empty canopy, unfurled his fists, and let her peer inside. He cradled his name like a broken-winged butterfly. Zoomer marveled at this new delight, and a second later snatched it up like a hungry cat. She toyed with it, rhyming and singing with it, dancing around gravestones and back out into the street. By the time they arrived at their shared apartment complex, she had worn his name through. It was as if she had never known him any other way. Though Zoomer was sworn to secrecy, word began to spread. Adrian's name whispered itself into the ears of his teachers and classmates. Soon, other pieces of Adrian began to emerge. Over winter break, he met a new reflection. On his way out of the shower, it tapped on his shoulder and drew attention to Bob's beard trimmer that sat charging beside the bathroom sink. The clippers were warm, running behind his ears, down his neck. Bits of black hair scattered across the bathroom tile while steam dripped down the mirror. In the end, Dad had to come in with kitchen scissors to help tidy up the back. There were days he still woke up numb. Nights when his thoughts raced across the popcorn ceiling and his eyes refused to shut. However, on the day his binder arrived in the mail and Zoomer insisted they bake a celebratory cake, Adrian was able to roll up his shirt sleeves to mix the icing. The cuts along his wrists had faded to bumpy scars. They were replaced by nicks earned with the shaving kit Pop bought him at a Boxing Day sale. Though his peach fuzz hardly needed pruning, Adrian enjoyed the lather on his cheeks and the sharp scent of aftershave. On a wet weekend in early spring, Zoomer showed Adrian how to sneak onto public transit. Stealing their way downtown, they fished out fresh looks from a second-hand shop. His favorite find was a pair of high tops. Adrian had been walking a little taller lately, and all his old shoes had become too tight. These ones beckoned to him. Their worn insoles and rusted laces, their frayed lining and sides the color of fresh pine on a chilly morning. They were perfect, more than perfect, they were his. When Adrian got home that night, he pulled out a Sharpie and signed each tongue, treasuring the joy of writing his name. Adrian's visits to the graveyard became sparse. He had lost some commonality with the nameless ones who rested there. He still kept an eye on the place from his bedroom window up on the 14th floor. It was less formidable from an aerial perspective. When standing among the rows of graves, the ground seemed to sprawl out in all directions. Seen from above, the patchwork lot looked more like a temporary oversight. A forgotten stretch of grass and stones large enough to hold a couple retail stores or a paper-hour parking lot. Plastic bags and fast food cups were frequently stuck between its fence post teeth. It slumped between walls of glass and concrete, the cause of frequent traffic jams as drivers struggled around its uneven intersections. The whole neighborhood was on stolen time. Everyone seemed to think so, especially Pop. The sparks of revitalization projects had already snaked across downtown like fire through dry leaves, leaving ash and unfinished condos in their wake. The city's eye would soon turn towards their strip of tacky corner stores and block apartments. Its mouth would open wide and draw them in, promising higher property values and nicer restaurants. The cemetery would be swallowed along with everything else. Some zealous young developer would rebrand it as untapped real estate, and all of Adrian's old friends would get paved over, turned into the foundations of an overpriced cafe or weed dispensary. But not yet. Weeds sprouted through the sidewalk cracks. Porch planters and balcony gardens shot up with fresh sprouts. The graveyard's cottonwoods became laden with downy seeds that filled the breeze. The city never held still. Parts of it were always dying off, getting eaten up and regurgitated as something entirely new. It turned out, Adrian was the same. The night his name had first escaped, he'd lost his footing in the world and never quite regained it. When walking to school or making a midnight run to the 7-Eleven, Adrian would go out of his way to pass that old iron gate. When craving a pinch of peace, he could still go walk those unkept paths, talk with the crumbling graves, and admire the monoliths. It was comforting to know, in the face of so much upheaval, some things could remain. Thank you. And with that, Samantha and I will have a little interview, and then we'll open for Q&A. And don't forget, afterwards we'll do the book signing and the Ghostic notes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Test, test. Great. Mic is working.
Hello. Wow. You're a really good writer, Markus.
Thank you.
Let's just get that out there right now. So yeah, we are here tonight to celebrate this beautiful book, which I love so much. And if you folks haven't picked up a copy yet, do so. You will love it too. And that you're back in Winnipeg after a long pilgrimage with Adrian in your pocket. This is tour stop number 6.
Let's see. Toronto, Montreal, Kingston, Winnipeg. It's number 4.
Number 4.
Yeah.
That's so quite a distance.
And a million different TikToks.
Yeah. Yeah. Markus also has a really amazing content. Like, I just love his videos. And I could learn a thing or two as an author. I just don't have the energy, but boy, you have it in abundance. And so this book is actually also your 7th publication.
Yeah, so my first books have all been novellas, which means they're 25,000 words or less. So that is why this can be called a debut novel, even though it is not my first book, because this is the first time I've ever written a novel-length work. This book is about 80,000 words, so more than triple my previous books.
Yeah, and you started off actually doing my Adrian homework, or sorry, not my Markus homework. You started out with zines, right?
That's
kind
true.
of, I'm not sure how familiar folks are in the audience with zines or zine culture, but they are these really great, it's this really great medium. They're very handmade, usually talking about like topics about like marginalization and subversiveness, and or just fun stuff, fanzines. And I just love that that's how you kind of started exploring a lot of the stuff that we see in this book. So yeah, we're just gonna have a fun little chat about you. I have a lot of questions.
Great.
Great. And then if anyone in the audience has a question, feel free to raise your hand at any time. And there will also be questions in the live feed. So if you're watching from home, you also have the opportunity to ask, and Markus will be forced to answer them.
Yeah. And I'll give a shout out to my TikTok audience that's watching on my phone over there. I won't be able to answer questions in that stream. So if you have one, hop on the McNally Robinson Zoom and you can ask it there.
Perfect. All right, so let's see. Actually, I had one quick question about the cover. I'm not sure if you guys taken a quick look at this. It's very beautiful. Who drew it?
So the artist's name is Keat Geniza. So this was a person mostly picked by Metonymy. They gave me a few options, and Keat has done some really beautiful graphic novels. And I thought that style that they brought was very like animate, and it was sort of partway between cartoony and real. And I really love the way that they like brought in the mist and the CN Tower in the background on the cover when you get a chance. And personally, I also just like the texture of the work. I think it has a really nice feel.
Yeah, and it really it lends itself to the subject, like the protagonists are teens, and just I find that like young adult stuff is very animated, and also it lends to like your background in zines.
For sure.
Which is great.
And there's subtle choices that the artist on the cover made that reflect in the book. For instance, you can see Adrian wearing his sneakers the color of pine trees on the cover here. And the moment itself, this is like a little scene in the book. So there's subtle choices here that sort of speak to the plot in a really mindful way. I love an artist who really listens to the work. Although on the back, there's my personal favorite character, which is Zoomer.
Is that Zoomer?
The
Yeah.
best friend.
Yeah.
Cheeky best friend who doesn't like the boyfriend.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, I'm gonna get into that because I like the framing of the narrative of this triad of characters. And actually, I want to go back to the prologue that you just read, which was like such an incredibly rich visual experience. And I just had so many thoughts. Like that prologue itself could just be a standalone short story about just the experience of exploring identity, which for teens is very important, and for trans teens is life-saving. And you mentioned in the prologue about how it was just very mundane, how Adrian came upon his name. And in reality, a mundane coming out like that is actually the desire, right?
Totally.
You hope for that. And I love that so much for your characters. And I wanted to just kind of maybe talk about, why it's obvious to maybe us or to folks who are familiar with just queer narratives, and but just as someone writing in own voices, why it's important to explore that kind of normal coming out.
For sure. I think there's a lot of reasons I approached that story the way I did. The story came first, and then the rest of the book followed. It definitely was very close to just being that story alone. And you notice the love interest is not in that piece. The ghost is not here yet. Yet Adrian is being haunted by his name. and it's sort of a foreshadowing of the story to come. And in my experience, especially when you're at that tender age, but really at any age in life, there are times where a part of you has you in its grips and you cannot deny it, even if it is hard to hold, even if it feels messy, even if you know that it will be okay or it won't. Sometimes it will chase you until you are ready to face it and own it. And in Adrian's case, I mean, that story is also speaking to, I was a trans teen. I had a pretty hard time coming out, but I did have actually people in my life who did embrace me, who welcomed me, maybe didn't understand everything I was going through, but who were there to love me as I was and have those hard conversations with me when we needed to and just be together. And what I actually wanted to show with that story was that even if everything goes the most ideal way, it will be hard. That is just the fact, and that's not just about coming out, but that's about growing up. That's about finding yourself at any time. And that it's okay, even if everything is perfect, that you still feel like crap. And that is just part of it. It is a vulnerable process.
Yeah, and a lot of when you're a teen or even when you're an adult, we do approach things in absolutes, like maybe in Adrian's case, as soon as I'm able to come out and be my authentic self and say my name, everything will be fine. But then the sun rises the next day, and it's not like when the movie ends and everyone skips off into the sunset and it's happily ever after. And what I really loved about this prologue is that it was this beautiful encapsulated story, and then the rest of the book is kind of what happens on the other side of that happily ever after. And like you said, it is complicated. There's a lot of stuff that this book explores that is Adrian's experience, but also about his family, like the portrayal of his dads and how, they are just two normal people and they have a lot of conflicts and challenges, and Adrian has to cope with that, which is what sends him to the graveyard.
Yeah.
And quick question before I get into my next section, is this graveyard based on a real one in Toronto?
Yeah, so there is a real graveyard near my house. I've lived in the same neighborhood for, my husband has lived there for about 7 or 8 years. I came to move in with him in 2018. And we recently moved from one side of the graveyard to the other. It's a huge strip right down the center of the whole neighborhood. And it actually gets cut off by the road at the very end, and then the rest is a park. But it's clearly just one big strip of land, and they put people in one half and then living people in the other. And it does actually have a big iron gate up front, which was a huge inspiration. I sent a picture of it to the artist to be like, this is what it's supposed to look like. But in my novel, I have imagined that the graveyard has been chipped away over many years, because this book is also a commentary about the ever-changing city, the slow creep of gentrification. And so in my version of events, the graveyard has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and now is sort of hiding in between all of these, upcoming condo buildings and corner stores. And the only little piece left is this small plot that is described in the book, the size of a couple of retail stores. You can decide what a retail store is. If it's this big, it's pretty big. And Adrian, when he goes in there and he walks on the grounds expand to sort of retake their original shape. And he gets to have the expansive experience of the graveyard. And it has a bit of a magical realism element that way. The last thing I'll say on this is I walked that graveyard many times while writing this book. And it wasn't until after I had been through several drafts, sold it to Metonymy, was producing the work, I happened across a very large old maple tree with a huge trunk missing out of it, which obviously I found very interesting. And I went to go look at it, and it's in a sort of corner of the yard with some older graves. And I found a gravestone right under the tree that said Yates. And if you look at the gravestone and then you look a little bit to the right, a stone throw away is a gravestone with the last name Carter, which is the last name I picked for the love interest, the ghost, Sorel Carter. And I just thought that was a beautiful moment of serendipity. It told me that I had picked the right names for the characters, for certain. And if I decided not to post a photo of it on social media because this is someone's gravestone, and I didn't want to capitalize that in a particular way. I wanted to respect that space. But if you're ever in Toronto and you visit Prospect Cemetery, you can look for the big maple tree with the trunk missing from it and go try to find Yates and Carter.
That's so amazing. I love that story. And it is so much more magical because you didn't share it on social media.
It's just for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love Toronto cemeteries because they are a lot different than this one. They are very well maintained because the families of the dead it's kind of like it's like beautiful afterlife mafia. Everything is very well maintained. Anyway.
There are some really interesting gravestones too. Just as a quick aside, the gravestones in this graveyard I visited especially, what I thought was fascinating is several of them have little portraits, like photos, framed behind sort of plexiglass or some kind of glass. So I actually wrote that into the book as well, just because I thought that was just such a neat way of remembering someone. I had not actually seen that. I'm sure it's at many graveyards, but that was the first time I encountered it. I thought it was just so neat. There's so many different designs. I'm always like, how did this one get here? Who thought of this idea?
Yeah, and it's all very individual, curating and caretaking, and like we could do a whole other conversation of just how great cemeteries are. As a space. And this book is like a celebration of that, and I love that you set the story there, and that actually is a nice dovetail now into the love interest that was not mentioned in the prologue, but is central to the narrative, Sorel, and eventually Adrian comes to the cemetery and is still kind of grappling with his new name and just how it's being taken in his life, and meets Sorel, and it's just a very interesting little meeting, and Sorel I like that you've interpreted his ghost as just kind of fading in and fading out, and not really like being attached to himself and his own memories. And Adrian kind of helps him come back to that. But as we see in a lot of young adult, there is #drama associated with this meeting, and it's very sweet, but there is also, like you were mentioning, Zoomer. So Zoomer was mentioned in the prologue, and she is Adrian's best friend and was there first. And there is a lot of push and pull that Adrian is in the middle of maintaining that best friend relationship and this new relationship with Sorel. And I wanted to just talk about why you chose the kind of or if it came out organically, the kind of relationship that Sorel has with Adrian, because it's not all lovey-dovey, happy, dippy. It's actually quite complicated and deals with a lot of complicated motifs.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much stuff baked in there. I go back to front sort of in the order of questions in there. This book really is trying to sit with heavier themes than I've been able to do so prior. The length of a novella is very constricting, and unfortunately it doesn't always allow for a lot of literary prose or pause for reflection or deep dives into complex character nuance. And so that is one reason why my previous books tend to be very fast-paced and just get the plot going and fit more or less into sort of some tropey standards. But in another vein, I was very hesitant for a very long time to ever tell a story where the character dies, where there is not a perfect ending. And specifically, I'm very mindful of this very common trope in a lot of LGBTQ literature of they call it bury your gays, which is that often in a piece of media, the gay character will get killed off in one way or another. Think Boys Don't Cry, Brokeback Mountain, if anybody's a sci-fi fan, The 100. Often this is a trope in literature. And so I was trying to undo that by saying, like, we can't have happy endings, we can't have happily ever afters. And I do still believe that. But I started writing this book after a friend of mine passed away unexpectedly in 2020. And she and I were organizers together. We worked at the Trans Collective at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University together. She's a nursing student, so full of life. And she's a Winnipeger, actually. And she passed away very unexpectedly. And I had to go to her funeral on Zoom, which was brutal. And it was so brutal, it became absurd. And almost like, I can't believe this is really happening. If she was here, she would be laughing about this with me. And that made me start to sit with grief and death and the importance of tackling with those harder topics, especially because before she passed, I recorded like a multi-hour long interview with her all about her life, just as part of a project I was doing on the side. It's in my film Mosaic. And so now I have this video of her, And I'm like, what is my responsibility? I now am a steward of this story. And so I started thinking about what does it mean, to carry the stories of those who have passed on. And then I sort of returned to this idea of the sad, dead queer kid who dies too soon. And I started wondering, like, what if we could resurrect our gays? What if we could speak to them through Ouija boards? What if we could go and visit them and still listen to the stories they have to share? And what if we could hold that grief and all the joy and everything else, and recognize how they continue to shape our lives even after they're gone? So that was a huge influence for why I wanted to write the story that I did. And then it really took off from there. And the characters in the book themselves really began to just take shape from that point on. It felt very much like channeling. I just had to go to the computer and write in like a fury while like the spirit took me, and then I'd have a chapter or 3. And the whole book of writing the first draft, like it took a matter of months. It took many years to refine it from there, but like these characters just became very evident. Zoomer is the perfect example of that, because I did not want to name her Zoomer. That I thought was a bad name for a character. It would be like calling a character Grandpa Boomer or like Auntie Gen X. Like it feels a little on the nose for a Gen Z character. And yet she is Zoomer. That's who she is. She doesn't have a last name that we know of. We don't know if Zoomer is her last name, maybe. Her granny is just Granny Z, so who knows what that means. But that's just like, that's what happened. And I was just there making it. And lastly, I'll say that the trio, they do very softly embody a little bit of neurodivergence. They're each like sort of representative a little bit of like, I'll let the reader infer, but like one of them experiences a lot of sensory overwhelm, feels very dysregulated while in big crowds, needs quiet time to calm himself and ground himself. Another one is constantly busy, always taking on new hobbies, forgetting things. There's a great scene where they like dump her purse and it's just full of crap. And then the third one, spoiler, not spoiler, died very young by his own hand because of his own troubles. And so he has his own demons that he's been facing before and after death. And plays it off like everything is fine. And on the surface is very fun and cute and silly, but behind the veil, there's a little more. So I'll let you interpret what you think each one of those characters represent. But I was sort of also keeping that in mind while crafting them.
Yeah, and that's funny, you like touched on my, I have it in my book here that says unbury your gaze.
Yeah.
Like just right down here, because this is what you coined as a Gothic novel, Gothic YA. And a lot of folks don't, we're grasping it more now because Gothic fiction is coming back, surging back with a vengeance, where the ghosts are usually a metaphor for something beyond that's happening to the characters who are interacting with said ghost. And Sorel is a person with a history and with motivations and, like you said, his own demons. And I think it's very interesting how Adrian gets to channel that out of Sorel in a way. Adrian becomes the Ouija board.
Yeah, I love that.
And their relationship is very cutesy, but it starts to get a little like you said, toxic. Because they are kind of reliant on each other to fill gaps.
Sort of becoming codependent.
Yeah, and that's a tough thing to talk to teens about, but it is an extremely relevant thing to put into a book for YA. And I actually then just wanted to ask why you chose YA as instead of just going like a straight adult fiction.
Yeah, I think partially because it's my wheelhouse. I've written a lot of YA, and I think that there are really powerful stories to tell about that particular demographic. And I think it's really important for especially LGBTQ teens to have stories that speak to their lives. I was thinking actually a lot of Neil Gaiman when I was writing this book. And when he wrote Coraline, he got a lot of people saying, this is too scary for kids. You cannot give this to children. It's far too scary. And it is. Like, I know adults who won't watch the movie Coraline because they find it too creepy. And he said, it is scary to the parents because they are imagining this as their child. For the child, it is empowering because they are imagining facing the fears that they experience every day. Because being a young person is inherently very scary. And it is absolutely a monstrous experience at times. And so that was a motivation for me, that I think that there is an importance to trusting young and old readers alike with monstrous stories, because much of our lives, even not just as a young person, but in the modern world that we face, we are so frequently met with like unimaginable horror, and we need to find it in ourselves, a method for continuing on. So that was part of why I wanted to put it in the YA genre. And again, also, it's just sort of how the characters sort of came out through the story. This is just like where they are. I do have a quiet dream, which is now no longer quiet because I'm saying it into a microphone, of writing a follow-up novel that is set during their university years. I think maybe one of the protagonists would go to university and one would go and start their career. And I think it could be really fun if they have to go into Ghost World next time and the two of them go experience the world on the other side of the veil. But I have not put pen to paper yet on that, because I promised my co-parents I would not take on any more projects until I'm done my dissertation. So
yeah, and you suitably kept yourself busy during November so that you wouldn't accidentally write a book for NaNoWriMo. So I respect that you did that. Yeah, and also what's interesting about YA as a genre, because I also, it's really just the only genre I've ever really written, aside from short fiction, is that it's the majority of people reading it are actually adults.
yes, absolutely.
And a lot of that it can stem from, I think what this book explores is an unmet need in your adolescence, and you're able to see characters meet those maybe challenges that you faced, and you never got a chance to either put it into words or see someone fight those battles or fight those fears on your behalf, which I think is really important with like own voices. So those are stories that are written about and experienced by a person who has authentically had that experience. And so my next question was kind of about how, when you started writing maybe trans stories or stories about exploring your identity or the communities that you were becoming a part of as you were in that stage of your life, how has where you started out in the literary landscape changed from where you are now?
Mm-hmm.
Was it more difficult for trans stories to find their footing than it is now? Do you feel that the landscape has shifted for the better, or it's a work in progress?
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting question, because actually Sorel and Adrian talk about this in the book, and they talk about the power of visibility. And like Sorel is like, you are living in a utopian time compared to when I was alive. I won't spoil when Sorel was alive, but we can infer that it was harder then than it is now to just go out and have a pride parade, for instance. And he sees things like Adrian having two dads, and it's like a non-issue. You know, random people on the street holding hands without getting harassed. And he sees this as like the most amazing time. And he's like, oh my God, you know, you're so lucky to be alive right now. And Adrian is like, yes, and being very visible comes with its own risk. It comes with its own dangers and struggles. It is not a utopian time in a lot of places, including sometimes kids' schools, or like, you know, my family's doing things like, man, we would love to take our kid to Disney World. Is there a chance they would take our child away if we were in that state? Because Florida has been passing really anti-gay laws, including one that they consider exposing your child to LGBTQ topics to be a type of child abuse. And that kind of stuff is really scary, and it's happening right now. So this idea like the struggle is over is not always true, and especially for a young person like Adrian. And he also says, you know, after coming out, everybody expected me to just be happy and just to be whole and good and everything is fine. And I still feel terrible. And now I feel like I can't even talk about it. And like, I'm supposed to be better now and I'm not, and I don't know what's wrong with me. So I think that story kind of speaks to what you're talking about that tension of recognizing the amazing progress that generation after generation has fought for and won, and that the struggle is ongoing, and that it continues to be hard in lots of other ways. Like, we've never seen the level of book banning, we have not seen the level of book banning in my lifetime that I'm aware of, that we have seen in the last like 3 years, really, especially in the US. But it's creeping into Canada all the time.
Yeah, yeah, we've seen it in Manitoba here quite a lot as well.
Yeah.
And we've seen it in anti-trans marches that have been met with huge like counter protests that have are really wonderful demonstrations. But I mean, the work is not over. And what's really great is that books like The Haunting of Adrian Yates exist, and more are coming out, and there is a hunger for it. Because this kind of visibility, especially for this age group and in schools, it saves lives. And these books are like the safe houses for young folks who are just experiencing that in their lives, and maybe they don't have that safe house at home, especially with kind of what's going on with the parental rights movement. Which I
can get into all day and all night.
Yeah.
But the good news is that there are presses like Metonymy that are looking for this work. And more, I think that the book itself can start to stand as a good story that has queer people in it without being a story about queerness. That to me is a sign of a tipping point. When we can read the book and appreciate it, and it's just rich with a diverse world, because that is the world we're in.
Yeah, and I think I read an article where you talked about your book Confessions of a Drag King.
Yes.
And where you said that you didn't have, in the book, you just felt it was important to just not even explain the protagonist's sexuality. You're just like, they're fluid, that's just what they are. And you didn't have to write 8,000 words about the exploration or the difficulties or it was just a person having an experience.
They can just have their story. And the reader can infer from there. I think labels have a very important role to play. I'm all for them for the people who use them. But especially like more and more as I've grown, I found that like living into your life is like the most powerful way to feel truly authentic to myself, and that the stories will just get told however they need to get told. And especially as an academic, when I'm reading stories from people from like the 1900s and they're using words I wouldn't use now, at a certain point you let go of trying to fit them in a particular place and just appreciate their life as it was, where they were.
Yeah, and just be like, I don't have to explain myself. And that's that's perfect. Are we monitoring the feed? If there were any questions there, but I think
our host is maybe hiding behind the curtain. Why don't we do an audience round, and then we can do a live feed?
Any questions from the audience?
Thanks for letting us go on.
And if you raise your hand, I will repeat your question, so you don't have to come up.
Then nobody ever wants to ask the first question.
I know. Jay, do you have any questions?
Will there be a graphic novel adaptation?
Sure. I wish there would be a graphic novel adaptation. I would love that. I think first and foremost, I would love to make an audiobook.
Oh,
so that hopefully
fun.
is in the cards for a future.
Is there, I guess I want to talk about accessibility for this book very quickly. So this book is available in stores. You can also request it at your local library. I already have, but if you do it multiple times, they'll buy it. And anytime, this is a fun fact, in Book Publishing 101, if you take the book out of a Canadian library and Markus has registered it, part of public lending right, he will get a royalty from the government for that. So nothing is lost. If you want to buy 10 copies here tonight and you also want to check it out in the library, it helps a lot. Is there an ebook version as well?
Yes, you can get the ebook directly from the publisher, Metonymy Press, and it will be coming on ebook platforms hopefully early 2024, but you can just get it straight from the publisher's website. Did you want to check the live stream in case there's any?
There's no questions at the moment.
Great.
Do you have a question?
I don't know, I was thinking about it.
Okay, well, you percolate one, and I'm gonna think of another one. Because we did blow through, like I had pages of notes, but Markus just said them all.
I have a bad habit of this. Anytime I do an interview, the interview host multiple times is like, and you've got me on to my next question. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. This is supposed to take double the time, and I just pack it together. It's almost like I don't respect binaries. Like they just
That's totally perfect.
No boundaries.
I actually wanted to ask, sorry, did you say you're working on your PhD?
I am, yeah. I'm working on a PhD at Queen's University. studying the use of creative writing workshops as a tool for community organizing.
Oh, nice.
So in 2020 to 2021, I ran a series of online writing workshops to connect emerging artists with more established ones, specifically within the trans community. And then my PhD is basically reflecting on that process and setting up a framework if other people wanted to basically do what we did, because I thought it was pretty successful.
Oh, good. That's good. And then you said that you don't have any projects coming up, but you were also saying that you have your thesis.
That is a project.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the thesis, is about this creative writing workshop pedagogy as a tool for trans community organizing. It's a mouthful because it's academic, but I'm very fortunate to be supervised by Dr. Trish Salah, who is also an author published with Metonymy Press, Tiny World. So yeah. Did anybody in the crowd want to ask a Q? And then if not, we can always just hop to the signing and the activity.
We have a question or comment right here in the front.
Oh, sure.
Perfect.
Thank you for breaking the ice.
Well, it's a dumb question.
No such thing.
How do you write? I mean, nitty gritty.
Yeah.
Where, what time of day?
Oh, I love this question.
Do you begin at the beginning and end at the end? Do you go through 6 times? That kind of, how do you write the question?
Love that, and I can tell that you have at least written one book, probably more than one, because I feel like that's like a writer question. I write at my desk in my room, which is also my bedroom, because I live in Toronto and houses are small. I have a very large monitor, and I have an ergonomic keyboard and a big mouse that I can grip sideways so I don't give myself carpal tunnel. And when I'm in the zone for writing, I will go first thing in the morning and start writing. When I drafted this, I wrote it chronologically, and I did not totally know how it would end. I do start with, in that chronological draft, point by point summaries, a broad strokes description of what is going to be in the book, and then I fill in from there. When I am ready to start drafting the chapters in earnest, I actually often write dialogue first, and then prose, and then dialogue, and then prose, and dialogue, and prose, and alternate, because I find if I hit writer's block, that's actually the easiest solution, is to switch the type of writing I'm doing. So those are the practicalities of how I write this. In a pinch, I grab a notebook and I go to a coffee shop and I scroll down a few ideas, and I keep a notes app on my phone, but I mainly do that for visual-based pieces of the work. So for instance, I drew a map of the neighborhood that the whole thing takes place in, so I could have a good sense of, and that it would make sense if they went from the apartment to the graveyard to the 7-Eleven and back. So those are some of the practicalities of how I write. I also write fervently in a manner that makes me forget to eat, sleep, go to the bathroom, to the point where my partner has to come in, bring me food and say, you must take a break, which to me is a good day. I also write on days where I stare at a blank page. I manage to write maybe a single paragraph, and then I delete it, and I put that document in a folder called failures. And I think that both of those days have important parts of the process. Did that answer your question? Thank you. Does anybody else have a question? No dumb questions. Okay, great. I think that they'll force you to use it, unfortunately.
So when you were in high school, your counselor said that you were a pioneer, right? So going back to that time, did you have any idea that you would be here tonight?
Well, thank you, Pampa. You're the best. And I'm always so hesitant to think of my life in that fashion. Oh, you're blocking the stream. This is the TikToker in me. I think that it would be very easy to become like so completely obsessed with myself if I thought of my life as a like heroic tale, as tempting as it is. But no, at the time, it's complicated because part of me, I think actually did have a sense that I was supposed to be here to do something. I had a very strong sense that I was supposed to live into a particular life, and I had no idea what it was. And part of the agony of that time was like, something is calling me and I don't know what it is. And I actually would describe it as a very spiritual experience in a way. There were very moments of profound understanding that I was brought into this life to fulfill some kind of purpose, and I had to go and find it despite everything. And I did not know where that would take me in so many different directions. And I know when I came out, it was such a mess. I continue to be a mess in so many different ways. But looking back, I realized that there was a necessity to that journey for me to bring me exactly where I needed to be now. You know, I needed to struggle at that time to learn to find my voice. I needed to be constantly searching for myself in a world that seemed to have no language for me, to learn how to write my own story and therefore others. I needed to be unapologetic and unable to hide so that those who were apologetic and hiding would know that it was still okay and still safe and that you could make it. And I remember even just the last time I was here, and I was in a bit of a smaller space in another section. I looked at the atrium and I had the thought, like, I'm going to be in there next time. And here I am. So I would say that I did have a sense, but it was not coming from me. Whatever force there is in this life that's guiding us, it was pulling me there. And my only hope is that I will be able to continue to follow it wherever I'm supposed to go next. So thank you.
That was perfect. And the timing was perfect as well. Because we are, I believe, at signing time.
Okay.
That's right.
Would you like to do the housekeeping, or would you, you sure.
If you have questions burning in your heart, I think there's one, but we can always chat at the signing table. The one in
Get
my
your
back is,
hauntings ready.
the one in the back is my Nana, so I think we have to take it.
Oh,
Okay, Nana.
saw him.
Well, then, okay,
Yes,
Nana, sorry.
absolutely.
Preferential treatment to
Of course.
grandparents.
When you're writing about, when you say these characters were emerging, are you actually thinking of people you already know?
Such a dangerous question. I love that you asked it. I'll give a brief answer in the sense that my characters, I would like to say, are an amalgam of people I know. I never write one person that I know in real life because they will recognize it. And I don't think that always feels good, especially if they don't get a heads up. But we are all always writing what we know. And specifically the characters in this book, I think more than many books I've written, are actually probably all pieces of myself. They are informed by people I know. Those who've met my husband, for instance, and then look at the cover of this book, might notice that the protagonist is tall, narrow, and ginger, which is also who I married. And so maybe I have a type. But personality-wise, I think that we're seeing like pieces of my own story interwoven with those stories that have been entrusted to me. All wound together in their messy relationships, which I don't know what that says about my psyche, but thank you so much for your question. And for all of your time here tonight. You're all just fabulous, and I appreciate you. Shout out to the streams as you are for being here. And I'll let you do the housekeeping now.
Yeah, actually, just before we go, I just wanted to give one last round of applause to Markus celebrating this wonderful book and this wonderful night.
I wouldn't be any other way. This is so perfect. I love coming out.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you to SM Beiko. Thank you to Markus Harwood-Jones. We're all looking forward to reading your new novel. Congratulations. Thanks again to Metonymy Press for helping to facilitate this evening. So we're going to move on to the signing. As described at the beginning, we're just going to help Markus get over to the signing table, which is right by the cash desk. We ask you to just wait a moment until we're settled there. And there will be books available to purchase and get signed. Feel free to grab one. There's some at the signing table. There's some at the cash desk. Get it signed. Just please pay for it before you leave the store. Kindly.
And don't forget the Ghost at Notes activity will be next to the signing table. Write down what's haunting you, and then I will release it in the world. If you want.
I think that's it for us tonight. Thank you so much for such a nice evening. Thanks for coming out, guys.
All right, I'm gonna get my stuff together.
Thanks, everybody. I'll just be at the signing table.
I can leave all this. I take this water and I'm gonna hop over.